connected with their kids better? The parents in the 1960s or the parents from today? I think the answer might surprise you, so let's get into it. In the 1960s, parents were losing their kids to an entire culture of free will and rebellion, rock and roll and protest movements, a generation that rejected almost everything their parents stood for. And it was all at once. So here's the question that I want to talk about today. Who actually connected better with their kids? Was it the parents fighting a cultural revolution in their living room, or us fighting something invisible in your kids' hands? And more importantly, what does that answer actually tell us about what it takes to reach your kid, no matter what decade you're raising them in? Let's look at both eras and see exactly what I mean. Let's set the scene here because I think it's important to understand what parents in the 1960s were dealing with, especially if you've never lived through it. The parents raising teenagers in the 1960s had grown up during the Great Depression or come out of World War II. This was a time when times themselves were tough, not enough food, not enough jobs, and definitely not enough money to make ends meet. Their values were built around stability and structure, sacrifice and authority. Don't question it, just do what you're told. That was the world they came from. And then their kids grew up in a completely different world. These kids grew up in a post war prosperity, more freedom than any generation before them. They sent people to the moon, and their music exploded at a pace never seen before. And drugs, well, I don't even want to tell you about that, but it was a lot. And those kids started asking questions their parents never really asked. Why? Why do we have to look like this? Why do we have to think like this? Why do we have to fight in this war? Why do we have to follow these rules? It wasn't just one or two rebellious kids in town, it was an entire generation, all at once, questioning the authority in the generation before them. Music changed, fashion changed, girls burnt their bras. Boys grew their hair out and joined a counterculture that their fathers couldn't recognize. And parents were left standing there thinking, I don't even know who my kid is anymore. And here's the part that I think that gets missed when people talk about this era. It wasn't really about the music or their hair or the protest. All of that was just their kids' reaction to saying no to authority. Underneath all of that was something simpler and more painful. It was an entire generation of parents watching their authority get rejected without rebuilding anything to replace it. And when that authority collapsed with nothing to replace it, parents just lost control. The parents weren't just losing control, they were losing their relationship with their kids because the relationship was built on authority instead of an emotional connection. That's the real story of this 1960s generation gap. Not the music, not the protest. Parents who had no idea how to reach out to their kids once being told what to do stopped being effective. And these kids were not having it. The more that you told them what to do, the more they wanted to do just the opposite. Now, let's bring this forward because I think when people hear about that story, they assume, well, at least we're not dealing with those same problems today. And I don't think that's true. I think we have the same exact problem. It's just dressed completely different. Here's what's happening in a lot of homes right now. There isn't a protest, no rebellion that you can see. Your kids aren't growing their hair out or making a statement. They're just somewhere else. They're on a screen. They're in a different room. They're present in the house, but absent from this moment. And here's the uncomfortable part. A lot of the time, so are we. We're not just losing our kids to a counterculture, we're slowly losing them, and they're losing us to electronic distraction and data overstimulation, to a thousand small moments where being physically present wasn't the same as actually just showing up. There's no moment where you just realize the relationship has drifted, no single protest or single haircut, just a slow accumulation of moments where the connection was available and parents didn't reach for it. And one day you look up at your teenager who feels like a stranger in a way that has nothing to do with rebellion at all. It's the same outcome as the 1960s, the distance, the disconnection, a kid who feels unreachable, but got there through silence of headphones instead of the noise. I lived a version of this myself. I was working 70, maybe 100 hours a week at one point in my life. Nobody was rebelling against me. There was no protest in my house. My youngest son used to raid my closet and put on my ties and clunk around the house in my dress shoes. Everybody actually thought it was adorable. And to me, it took me years to understand what this actually was. It wasn't a kid playing dress up. It was a kid trying to feel close to a father who wasn't around enough to feel close to directly. There was no rebellion in my house, just distance, built quietly, the same way it was building in a lot of those homes right now without anybody raising their voice about it. It was the same outcome as the parents in the 1960s, just a different cause entirely. So here's where I think this actually gets useful. Because if the obstacle in the 1960s was rejection of authority and the obstacle today is quiet distraction, what's the one thing that actually could have worked in both of these eras? Here's what I think the parents who actually got through the 1960s with their relationship intact with their kids figured out, whether they had words for it or not. Authority alone was never going to hold the relationship together because I told you so was only going to work for so long. It took something else: curiosity about who their kids were becoming, presence, even when it was uncomfortable, a willingness to ask why instead of demanding obedience. And the parents who leaned into this understanding with their kids during that decade of upheaval, instead of just trying to control them, kept their relationships. And the ones who only had authority to offer lost them. Now look at today. The parents whose relationships are surviving the screens, the distraction, the noise, they're not dealing it with rules either. They're doing it in the same way, with curiosity and presence and showing up for their kids' world instead of demanding that their kids show up in yours. That's the thing that never changed. The obstacles were completely different: rebellion in one era and distraction in another. But what it actually takes to reach your kid through either one has been exactly the same through the entire time. So, who actually connected with their kids better? The parents of the 1960s or us? Honestly, I don't think that's the right question. Some parents in the 1960s figured it out and some didn't. Some parents today are figuring it out, and a lot aren't. The era was never really the deciding factor. What decided it then and what decides it now is whether a parent is willing to actually reach for their kid instead of waiting for their kid to reach for them. Different decade, different obstacle, same answer. And that's kind of the whole idea behind this channel, Built Not Hacked. Because there's no trick, no era, no easier version of this that some other generation had access to that we didn't. There's just work, the same work, generation after generation. So drop a comment below. What do you think that parents in the past generations actually got right that we've lost today? Or what do you think that we've actually gotten better at? I want to hear both sides of it because life isn't hacked, it's built. And I'll see you in the next one.